Hey everybody, Tony here. Today I'm going to be talking about Mozart's Magic Flute, which was shown live at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. Now, I have my program here with me, so that just in case I forget any names, or just in case if I mispronunciate some names, then I always have this as my guide. So, the conductor was Ivan Repusic, a name that I haven't really heard of in a long time until last night. And the production was by Günther Kremer. The stage design and costumes were done by Andreas Reinhardt, and the chorus master was Thomas Richter. So, let's move on to the production of this particular opera. Granted, there are some things I like about this production, like the fact that Monostatos comes off as quite likable. Oh, sure, we're supposed to hate him after what he tries to do to Pamina. Like, he tries to rape her. He tries to force his love upon her. But this type of aspect of Monostatos has been toned down quite heavily in favor of a more human and slightly more likable Monostatos. Like, for instance, in the second act, before he starts singing Alles für die Liebe, which is his little aria, there was like a dialogue which was supposed to be after the Queen of the Night's second act aria between him and Pamina, that Monostatos questions Pamina that there's like one thing that he has to do in order to save her from her mom's wrath, and that's to love him. But he doesn't try to rape her, which is quite good. He just asks the question, can you just at least love me? Then Pamina says, no. She says that her heart only belongs to Tamino. So yeah, there's like a sort of forced love triangle that wasn't really there. It was just Monostatos trying to be loving towards Pamina, but Pamina just simply says, mm-mm, mm-mm, not you. Tamino's my man. That's all I can ever have. And there was something quite funny. Pamina, while Monostatos is singing his little aria, she leans on him. She leans on him. And when Monostatos says, Ich muss sie küssen, I have to kiss her, she like gets shocked and like says, the heck's wrong with you, man? I mean, I thought we were supposed to be friends. Oh wait, not just friends. I thought we were supposed to be more like somewhat like business partners because we're in the same initiation league, similar initiation league, since you're his servant. And I have my heart on someone else. So yeah, that's kind of like the subtext that Pamina gives Monostatos while he sings his little aria. So yeah, he comes off as quite likable, a lot more likable than other productions. And another thing I like about this production was the inclusion of the three words that Tamino tries to enter through those doors, through the three doors. And they keep saying zurück. Well, just the first two doors. The first door that Tamino tries to enter had the word Vernunft. And in the second door, I forgot. I think it must have been like something in terms of like Arbeit or something like that. I don't really remember. But the third door that Tamino ends up entering is Weisheit, or wisdom. So I thought it was a really good addition just to give this production a little bit more authenticity. Or not just authenticity, but a little bit more of stating that this is the magic flute, after all. And another thing I like about this production is the rainforest scenery in which Tamino is playing his flute, but in this production, the flute plays itself while Tamino holds it in his hand, which is quite funny, you may ask. Quite funny and strange, you may ask. So, yeah, but if I could ignore that fact, the rainforest scene just makes me seem like I'm on some ride in a theme park, but only a lot better. So, yeah, that's how I felt. It was actually pretty good. And another thing I like about it is the fact that there were like Egyptian scrolls in the second act, the first scene of the second act, stating its like authenticity of the magic flute. Like you see hieroglyphics, which states that we've entered Sarastro's temple, and that's all I could say. And another funny fact is like this long sheet of metal, which the second priest uses for like lightning and all that, like as a lightning sound effect and all that, a thunder sound effect, just to intimidate Papageno, which I thought was pretty darn hilarious. And then we have the serpent, or lack thereof, so to say. I mean, it looked more like a dragon. I thought it was quite intimidating. It actually kind of reminded me of the flying creature from the Neverending Story. Only it doesn't fly, it just basically crawls like left and right and tries to go forward. And I was quite intimidated by that, even though in reality it's not real. It was just basically handled by several women inside the serpent. I was generally intimidated by that, and overall, I could say I was quite amazed by that. Now let's move on to some questionable parts about this production. First of all, why have Papageno come in clown makeup? Okay, it makes sense that he's part of the Commedia dell'arte, but it would make a lot more sense for him to come in as a woodsman. Okay, it's true. Papageno is a very hilarious character, but what we also have to know is that he's just a guy who loves the simple things in life. He just likes being simple. Plain, plain and simple, so to say. Excuse me for the overuse of the word simple, so yeah, but that basically describes Papageno, a simple man who wants just nothing but simple pleasures in this world. And to have him come in like a clown just makes it seem more over the top than usual. And that's all I can say. And another thing that I kind of have to question is why have Sarastro and his band of initiates, also the speaker, come in looking like as though they came out of some martial arts school? Yes, I know they're supposed to be a symbol of wisdom and like Freemasonry, but the way I could see it, they just look as though they come out from some they came out from some martial arts school. Yeah, with what? With their karate gi and the Moorish servants looking like ninjas. So, yeah, that's quite questionable. And the speaker pretty much looked like a Zen master. He looked like a Zen master, which I kind of thought was either unintentionally hilarious or just plain questionable. The Sarastro looked like a sensei in a martial arts school, so that's pretty much one of the questionable aspects of this production. Like having Sarastro and his band of initiates dressed up like martial arts school students or something like that. Like people in the martial arts school. But it's quite interesting, no doubt about that. Now let's move on to the parts of the production I don't really like or don't really care for. The Queen of the Night's costume didn't look that grand or goddess like or chic or elegant. It just made her look like some schoolmarm with that white wig and the gray ball gown. I mean, she didn't really look like a queen at all. She looked like someone who's like a schoolmarm from the 1800s. She looked like a schoolmarm from the 1800s who basically came out of a ballroom. That's all I can say. When I think of the Queen of the Night, I think of her looking like a goddess, looking younger than she actually is, even though she's the mother of Pamina. So, yeah, with this costume, I didn't really care for it at all. It just made her look like some schoolmarm. Plain and simple. It just made her look like a schoolmarm. Now, another thing I didn't really like were the three boys' costumes. They looked hideous on them. It looked hideous on them. Having them wear short, really short shorts, it looked hideous. Especially in the fact that they are like hanging around in like a harness flying in the first act of the opera. Now, I would usually expect them to be on some flying boat. Now, that would have been a lot better, but having them fly around and just having wings taped on their back in a harness, in an invisible looking harness, that didn't really do justice at all. In fact, it looked kind of trashy, so to say. So, yes, the costume for the three boys were not something I really care for, but I kind of despise. So, yeah, those are pretty much the things about the production I don't really care for or that were glaring at me. Or, excuse me, glaring flaws. Another glaring flaw, I might add, would have to be the fact that Papageno comes in with nothing but red feathers coming out from his cap. It would make a lot more sense to have Papageno catch like someone who's like handling a bird puppet. That would make a lot more sense rather than having Papageno come in clown makeup and having him pour out from his hat a bunch of red feathers. That just seemed cheap. That just seemed really cheap for someone who was singing the Birdcatcher's aria. It was cheap. It would make a lot more sense if Papageno actually did something like get a net and catch like some exotic bird or something like that, but no. Have him come in and pour out red feathers from his cap. Yeah, that just looked cheap. And I know I seem like I'm ranting, but why settle for that? Just why? I know this production seems like it's on a budget, but it just seems to fall flat in certain areas. But yeah, other things I forgot to mention that are good. The scene where Tamino and Pamina enter in the trial of fire and water. I thought it looked magnificent, though quite minimalist. There was like red all throughout. which is kind of like a sign saying that this is Tamino's and Pamina's penultimate chance to prove themselves that they are mature human beings, and this is how it's going to be done. It heightens the intensity of the scene, which, for what it's worth, is probably what I liked. And then there's the red dagger that shows up almost every single time in the duration of the opera, especially in the opening of the opera, in the overture. You have people walking around across the stage, and there are like these shapes. One's like a pyramid, and the other is like the moon, which is supposed to represent night and day. I thought it was pretty innovative. I thought it was pretty much telling us that, okay, this is a battle between light and darkness, even though it kind of feels shoved in front of our faces. But yeah, during the opening of the opera, we have all of the chorus members walking around on stage, and then once they stop in their respective areas, there's this dagger that comes out, a red dagger, which kind of represents the separation between man and woman, or light and dark, and is the main weapon for using to kill Sarastro, in which Tamino is the first person to hold it, but there were also some funny moments with the usage of the dagger. Like when he tries to get out the padlock from Papageno's mouth. And speaking of the padlock, yeah, basically instead of the ladies giving Papageno a stone and then some water instead of like cake and wine, they just cut to the chase and just give him a padlock in his mouth. Which I thought was okay, but it would make a lot more sense to follow the libretto, but I'm just nitpicking. That was actually pretty funny watching the padlock fly through Papageno's mouth in an instant. And yeah, it was actually pretty cool. And another thing I like to mention is that after one of the ladies, the three ladies, kills the serpent with a pistol, there are like a lot of women coming out from the serpent. And I could easily presume that they are the other attendants of Queen of the Night, of the Queen of the Night. And they basically get themselves involved in the scuffle between who gets Tamino, between the three ladies and the additional attendants. Plus, they were also quite useful in the final scene when they are about to attack Sarastro's temple with rifles, nonetheless, which I thought was really innovative. So, yes, all I can say about this production is that, for what it's worth, it's interesting, despite having some questionable methods to this production as a whole, and for having certain aspects about this production, costume wise, that I don't really care for. So, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the how the conductor handled the opera as a whole. Okay, so he started off the overture pretty well. And as I said, the conductor was Ivan Repusic. So Mr. Repusic started the overture pretty well. And he was able to make the speeds for Zu Hilfe, der Hölle Rache, and other allegro parts of the opera at its appropriate tempo. However, there are certain tempos in certain numbers of the opera that just made me scratch my head. For example, the O Isis und Osiris sung by Sarastro. It's supposed to be pensive. It's supposed to be like slow, but it's a bad word to use for it. It's supposed to be an adagio. It's supposed to go in a more adagio fashion, but instead it borders towards allegro, which is not really appropriate when you have Sarastro's arias, especially that of O Isis und Osiris, especially that of the March of the Priests. That's supposed to be a little bit more adagio. So, yes, there are certain speeds in the opera that weren't really appropriate for certain moments. And that's all I can say. The speeds would have been handled a lot more appropriately. Like, for example, like I said, for the O Isis und Osiris, which was sung by Sarastro. But the other numbers I could easily forgive. I thought that Höderache was paced really well. Not too fast, not too slow, but at the right tempo, which sort of emphasizes the fury that the queen feels, and in this case, about losing her own daughter, and even the fact that Sarastro might end up vanquishing her presence as a whole. So, yes, the conducting was a mixed bag. There were certain numbers that were at the appropriate speed. However, there were certain numbers in the opera that were kind of veering a little on the fast side, which actually is not really that appropriate. But all I can say about the orchestra is that they were pretty good. They were all in tune. The same thing I can say about the chorus. They were all well tuned and they sang and did their parts really, really well. That's all I can say. So, let's move on to the singers. In the role of Tamino, we have Korean tenor Josep Kang. And let me say this, I absolutely love his voice. It was even all throughout the registers. There were no gimmicks. Yes, at times you could hear his Chinese or Asian accent, but that's forgivable because he had such a pure, lovely, firm sounding lyric tenor voice that I really, really love. Plus, he was able to be a good actor for the most part, and he's also quite handsome. He's quite good looking, and yeah, he's quite young. He looks to be about in his mid 20s, like late 20s, mid 20s, which was really appropriate for Tamino. And he's youthful enough, really. But the biggest asset of Mr. Kang really has to be his voice. He has a magnificent instrument, and he uses that really, really well. In the portrait aria, in the flute aria, I felt that it was heavenly luscious. It was probably one of the best performances I've seen vocally. And now we have the Papageno, sung by John Chest. And let me just say, he was the star of last night's opera. I mean, he was able to pull almost all of the stops. He was very attractive, I might say. He looked like a male supermodel. He looked like he could be on the cover of high end magazines. He was that attractive. He practically is a favorite among the ladies. And his voice, I love it. For the most part, it was even all throughout. It was firm. There were no signs of wobbling. It was focused. It was a focused baritone voice with a great amount of virility added onto it. And his comic timing, perfect. Just perfect comic timing from Mr. Chest as Papageno. I mean, I was practically laughing as well. In a good way, really. He was that great of a comedian. And the audience seems to agree so. And he brings the audience in as well on the action. That's how much of a captivating actor he is. It's not just his looks, but also the quality of his voice, the sheer quality of his voice and his stage presence. Unforgettable, especially after the trial by fire and water act. You basically see him walking on the stage, seeing his companion Tamino and Pamina finally having their triumph, whereas he's just there, pretty sad that he can't find Papagena and he has yet to triumph, and it's gonna end up taking time for him. You really feel for him. So yeah, Mr. Chest was the star of the opera, even though it's about Tamino's trials of growing up. It basically became John Chest as Papageno being as entertaining and as lovable and as memorable as he is. And that is a huge plus. And now we have the Sarastro sung by Tobias Keita. He was good, but not great. Not in the style of, let's say, singers like Gottlob Frick or Kurt Böhme or Martti Talvela or even Matti Salminen, who's still singing to this very day. And fun fact about this interpreter of Sarastro, Albert Pesendorfer called in sick, so basically Mr. Keira was a replacement for him. All I could say is that he's also very handsome. He also looks like a movie star. Yeah, he pretty much looks like a movie star. And his voice was good all throughout. It was well focused. There were no flaws. Oh, sure, there are times that his lower notes do need a little bit of work, but just give it more time, and in a few years from now, he's gonna sing a lot more big basso roles. I could really see a lot of potential in Mr. Keira, and frankly, he left a lot of great impressions on me as Sarastro. Sure, he doesn't look grand or that much like a grandfather or a father. He looked more like a movie star, basically. He looked more of a movie star in his mid to late 30s, and for the most part, I thought his voice was really nice. He looked really nice all throughout. He looked really good. He looked flawless, and even though his voice kind of does need a little bit of work here and there in terms of the lowest registers, I could really see a lot of potential in him. And he's also one of the greatest performers in terms of this production. Now let's move on to The Queen of the Night, sung by Hulkar Sabirova, who hails all the way from Uzbekistan. I thought she was a really good singer all throughout. She has a really strong voice, albeit her high notes, her highest notes, like her high Fs, weren't really that great. But that be nitpicking. Still, she possesses a beautiful instrument, a strong instrument, and frankly, I would really like to hear her in more dramatic coloratura roles. Oh, yes. When I checked her schedule in Opera Base, it stated that she was singing the Sandman and the Dewman from Hansel and Gretel, and also that of Anna from Nabucco. And it also states that she's going to be singing Lucia di Lammermoor in the Deutsche Oper Berlin this coming 2014. And yes, she's also sung Olympia in Essen. So I could really see a lot of potential in Miss Sabirova. I mean, why not give her roles like Donna Anna or Constanza or Marguerite Valois or a lot more bel canto roles? That would really do a lot of great for her voice. That would really be great for her voice since she's, well, established herself to be a great coloratura soprano. Sure, she doesn't have the ferocity of Diana Damrau, nor does she have the crystal clear high notes of Erika Miklosa, but she was able to make a memorable interpretation of Queen of the Night. And she was able to tone down her bitchy, power hungry nature in favor of, okay, I need to protect my daughter. And yeah, basically, she didn't make her power hungry and evil and bitchy. No. I think she was able to be directed really well on how the Queen of the Night really is supposed to be. A woman who does have pride, but is not that much of a total bitch. In fact, she's quite concerned for her daughter, especially in the last scene of Zauberflöte, where you really see her reaching her arm to Pamina, but then Pamina decides, okay, I might as well just I might as well just spend my days with Tamino happily. And the Queen of the Night just stands there and says, fine then. My daughter's a big girl already, so I can't do anything about it. And speaking of the Pamina, we have Martina Welschenbach singing the role of Pamina. I love her voice. It was a good instrument. It was a light, lyrical, silvery instrument that she makes great use of. And in the high notes, she was very well focused. And there were no wobbles to her voice. It was actually beautiful. Plus, Miss Welschenbach was pretty to boot. And all I can say is that Welschenbach's interpretation of Pamina was pretty good. Was really good. There were almost little to no flaws in her voice, which is actually saying something. And that's just it. I really liked Miss Welschenbach in that role. And now we have the Monostatos portrayed by Burkhard Ulrich. He's still so fine in voice. He is very fine in voice after all these years of singing. And he was able to make Monostatos pretty likable and at times funny, even though at times he's supposed to be a comic villain. He kind of downplays his comic villain um, role and gave us something a little bit more human. And in terms of voice, like I said, it's very fine, and I like it. All I could say is that Mr. Ulrich was very good. He was very good. And now we have the Papagena, which was sung by Alexandra Hutton, who hails all the way from Australia. I love her voice. I really love the quality of her voice. It's lyrical, plain and simple, and it's even all throughout the registers. And she makes great use of her small yet vital role in Papageno's case. She was lovely to boot, and when she was the old lady, she was quite hilarious. And I was able to hear a few ad libs here and there, even while she was exiting the stage, which I thought was pretty hilarious. And in her young girl form, yeah, she did look like Pierrot Lunaire. But I thought she was pretty cute. I thought she was really cute in that costume. And she had such a lovely voice. I honestly hope to hear more from Miss Hutton in the upcoming years. And now we move on to the Speaker of the Temple, Mr. Jörn Schumann. I don't think he really had a great night in terms of his voice. Granted, it's well focused and it's gravelly enough, but it didn't really sound like anything special. I almost didn't really care for his voice, but his interpretation of the speaker was cryptic. It's like he came in the scene with a really straight face, showing that I may not have emotion, but I do have a lot of reasoning. In fact, that's how the speaker is supposed to be. He has a lot of reason. He's not all emotional. He thinks with his head, not with his heart. And on top of that, Mr. Schumann looked like a Zen master. And here's something quite questionable um, that I forgot to add, like especially in the scene where in the little um, part where the invisible chorus say "bald, bald, oder nie," in which Mr. Schumann finds his speaker character in a trance, more like in a meditational trance, so to say. It was almost to the point where it was unintentionally hilarious, but that's forgivable. He's supposed to be in meditation mode, and for what it's worth, it's okay, really. So, yeah, all I have to say is that he's a good interpreter, but his voice kind of leaves a lot to be desired. And now let's move on to The Three Ladies, sung by Siobhan Stagg, Rachel Hodge, and Dana Beth Miller. Now, with Miss Stagg as the First Lady, well, she's a light lyric soprano with some coloratura technicalities. Now, this is the type of voice I don't always associate with the First Lady. With the role of the First Lady, I kind of expect more of a meteor spinto voice. Well, but not like a full dramatic soprano, but I kind of expect more of either a full lyric soprano or even that of a spinto soprano. Like, I would have wanted to hear like a soprano like Anya Harteros singing the role of the First Lady or something like that. I would have wanted to hear that type of voice. But for what it's worth with Miss Stagg as the First Lady, I thought she was very even throughout her registers, even though her voice isn't really ideal for the First Lady, but more for like Pamina or Papagena, or even that of Blonda from, or even that of Blonda or Despina. So yeah, it's not really my ideal voice, despite her pulling off a fun and memorable performance and also having such a great instrument. Now, with Rachel Hodge as the second lady, I thought she was pretty good. She was able to connect herself to the scene pretty well, and she was able to play off her two other colleagues really well. And there were moments that I was able to laugh a bit. So, yeah, she was a pretty great singer. And with Dana Beth Miller, she was able to distinct herself between Stagg's high soprano voice and Hodge's mezzo voice with her lyric contralto voice. And for what it was worth, I have to say that Dana Beth Miller was a pretty good interpreter of the third lady. So overall, the three ladies as a whole, were quite good all throughout. They blended really well, and they acted really well, I might add. And now for the three boys. They are sung by the soloists of the children, children's chorus of the Chorus Academy Dortmund, or as it's said in German, Solisten des Knabenchores der Chorakademie Dortmund. I thought they were really, really beautiful in terms of sound. Though granted, I didn't like their costumes. I really didn't. But their sound was great all throughout. And the two priests that were sung by excuse me, Stephen Barkey and Jörg Schöne were actually quite well sung as well, with Jörg Schöne as the second priest working off quite well of John Chest's Papageno. So yes, you have Mr. Schöne's second priest with his snark and sarcasm, so to say, and you have and then you have Mr. Chest's Papageno with his screwball comedy, which I thought was really hilarious. And then, yeah, so pretty much among the two priests, I have to say that Mr. Shona was pretty much a standout, given the material he does with Papageno. And now we move on to the Two Armed Men, which were sung by Paul Kaufman and Andrew Harris. They were quite underpowered in their number. Der welche something like that. They were quite underpowered, which is quite pitiful because when I think of the Two Armed Men, I expect two powerful voices despite the fact that they just stand there singing. I expect two powerful voices. But here in this production, they were quite underpowered, which is quite pitiful, but still, their intonation was good all throughout. It's just that Paul Kaufman is a lot more amplified than that of his colleagues, which is quite pitiful, but well, it was just okay. Their interpretation of the Two Armed Men was just okay, and but slightly on the underpowered side, which is actually quite pitiful. Overall, I could say that last night's production of Magic Flute was good. It was not great, nor wasn't it bad. It didn't have the lavish sets of David McVicker, but at least it was a lot better than Martin Cousset's production. Yeah, it'd be unfair to compare two productions, but that's just me. So, yes, the production was good despite having certain things I either had to question or didn't really care for. And the conducting at times was good, but there are moments that it could have used a lot more work, especially in the slower, more adagio moments. And the singing, I have to say that the singers pretty much put their all in this production, and that's very laudable. So, yes, overall, I felt like I had a good evening, and I enjoyed watching this interesting production. And let me just say that Mr. Chest was the absolute star of that evening, and I wish him a lot of prosperity in his future endeavors. Well, I hope you all enjoy this review. If you do agree or disagree with what my thoughts are with this production or even on the singers or the conducting, then please feel free to express your minds as well or express yourselves as well. I would really like to hear feedback. Well, That's all for now, and have a nice day.